Welcome back to the Scatter Sheep Podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Wade. It's March 28th, 2025. And for today's episode, we're going to review a video from somebody I had never heard of before. His name appears to be Dave Miller. He's part of something called the Apologetics Press. This link on a Facebook thread where somebody was promoting the traditional NAR Dominionist position of America being somehow founded by, people who we would make akin to the evangelicals of today, and that, secretly this has always been and supposed to be a Christian nation, which is absolute nonsense. That flips not only the Bible on its head, but also flips American history on its head. As a former minister of the gospel through the Assemblies of God, and also as a former teacher of American history, this offends me on two different levels. So there is no objective way that you can look at American history and determine that what passes in the apostate church today is somehow what the founding fathers wanted. The schemes that people like Mr. Miller and people I have covered before, like Eddie Hyatt, what they do is they scour history to find random quotes, and they kind of strip out any political purpose that might have actually been in the quote to somehow infer that these individual quotes mean somehow that they were secretly, singing "Friend of God" in 1787 or whatever. And they weren't. The world was different then, certainly. Culture was different then, certainly. But the notion that the people who escaped religious persecution in other parts of Europe and came to this country then wanted to set up a theocracy is simply asinine. It is completely historically inaccurate. And it requires the kind of historical gymnastics that are pretty much akin to the biblical gymnastics that these same people gravitate toward. Their academia supports themselves. They don't accept anything from outside the bubble that they've created, and they kind of prop each other up. Eddie Hyatt's the most famous for this because he'll quote himself in every single article he ever does. And he quotes himself as being somehow an authoritative source on the subject matter at hand, which he is not. People like Eddie Hyatt and apparently Dave Miller serve political masters in this country, just like the NAR Dominionist movement does. And part of that narrative is to create this backstory that we were always a Christian nation, and that somehow now we have veered off course, and God is wanting to revive the country. It's just simply not supported by scripture or by history. So let me say, from a secular standpoint, from a purely carnal standpoint, America is, I believe, the best experiment in human government in history in all likelihood. We have done a tremendous amount of good. There is no question about that. But that doesn't mean that we get to dismiss all the things that we've done bad, or all the things that we've done that are not very Christian. It's just, beyond myopic to, turn your blind eye to everything that might be construed as negative, or even worse, to lie about it and put it in like as good a light as possible. So when I clicked on the link in the chat or the thread, it took me to the Apologetic Press. It took me to this guy Dave Miller's series of videos on America. And I don't know if I'm going to go through them all. I selected episode 6, which we're going to review today, where he tries to deflect the notion of deism as being part of the fabric of many of the founding fathers, which is just simply an historical fact. He's going to try his best to parse out the word deism and use dictionaries from today and from the 1700s at the end of the day, he doesn't escape the fact that they were essentially deists. I mean, if you want to use the word theist, that's fine. The bottom line is that they were not Christian believers as we know today. Were there some? Sure. I mean, John Adams was apparently a devout follower, although even he denied the Trinity. So these are people that Dave Miller, I would wager, probably wouldn't welcome in his own church today, based upon their beliefs. But then, as we'll see, the obfuscation that he goes through is kind of staggering. And lest you think this is somehow unimportant, I believe that NAR Dominionism and the idolatry of this world is quite possibly the last idol of the church age. That people are going to stand before Christ, as Matthew 7 teaches us, and they're going to say, Lord, Lord, didn't we, wrap ourselves up in the flag in your name? Didn't we, post memes of like Jesus holding, machine guns and, wrapped up in the flag? And the reality is that the Bible clearly states that we are to be pilgrims and sojourners through this land. We are not meant to be citizens of this world. We are citizens of heaven. God does not approve of dual citizenship, because then your loyalty gets split and you start accepting everything that your perceived political panacea presents, because the first rule of idolatry is you never go against the idol. Nothing can ever taint your idol. Has to be pure. It can't. You can't accept the criticism of your idol. And before people start developing the traditional reflexive whataboutisms in their brain, this is not an endorsement of any other side or any other political belief. This is simply an attempt to tell the truth about what our history is, and more importantly, where we are today as a church, where we are today as believers, because it's very important that we not idolize this world, and we don't idolize the leaders in this world, as we see on the right now and in the apostate church system and in NAR Dominionism. Everything is about idolizing Donald Trump because he is the leader of the Republican Party. And, you have people who are very mainstream in Christian, in the church today, leaders who say the most absurdly stupid things, like Jack Hibbs before the election said, basically, even if you chose to not vote at all, you were going to hell. Then people like Greg Locke or Mario Murillo basically saying if you voted Democratic, you were going to hell. Just like cutting off half of the people that are in the church. It's the arrogant assumption that everything on your side is righteous, and everything on the other side, therefore, must be satanic, demonic, or evil. And the reality is that, and I think God tests us. And the bottom line is the person that's being elevated to the position of righteousness is probably the least righteous person who ever ran for office. But that doesn't matter, because he has a little R next to his name. So, and that becomes the only thing that matters. So they employ people like Dave Miller or Eddie Hyatt as historical revisionists to present this backstory narrative of America. And it's important to recognize the tactics and the schemes, because they're pretty devious, and they create false theology within believers to continue to foster NAR Dominionism. So we're going to go through this episode 6, America's Most Pressing Concern, session 6, the Founders and Deism, and we'll comment along the way.
In our last session together, we reminded ourselves that the founders of our country clearly intended for the Christian religion, Christian principles, Christian morality to serve as the platform on which the republic is poised. We then raised the question that is raised many times in our country these days, but weren't the founders a bunch of deists, and and racist slave owners?
Oops.
The platform on which the republic is poised. We then raised the question that is raised many times in our country these days, but weren't the founders a bunch of deists and racist slave owners?
And the answer to that is yes. I may go back to session 5 at some point because that's slavery. And I haven't heard it yet, but I'm pretty sure he's going to use the same arguments that Eddie Hyatt uses to try to pretend that this country somehow was not founded upon the very evil notion of slavery. And now, granted, again, the culture was very different at the time, but the way Eddie presents it is like, America was on the cutting edge of ending slavery, which is absurd. We were one of the last industrialized nations to eliminate slavery. And we did so. We even fought a civil war over it. I mean, it's just simply historically inaccurate what they're portraying. But I also just want to point out that, Dr. Miller, is running this video for someplace called the Apologetics Press. So it's definitely supposed to be a Christian video, standing behind 4 flags and wearing a flag tie. And if that's not a glaring red warning sign, I don't know what is. But let's continue.
We dealt with the matter of the founders in slavery in our last session. Now we turn our attention to this other matter of deism. Were the founders of our country, in fact, deists? Often have we heard even high-ranking political theorists and professors in prestigious universities claim, the founders were not Christian anyways, in any form or fashion. They were deists.
Correct.
They believed in a generic presence. Well, let's try to answer that question. Were the founders deists? And to do that, first, don't you have to get a definition? What are we talking about, deism? So if you go to a standard dictionary these days, like, for instance, the American Heritage Dictionary, here is the definition of deism: the belief based solely on reason in a God who created the universe and then abandoned it, assuming no control over life, exerting no influence on natural phenomena, and giving no supernatural revelation. Here is the current Webster's New World Collegiate Dictionary: belief in the existence of a God on purely rational grounds without reliance on revelation or authority, especially the 17th and 18th century doctrine that God created the world in its natural laws, but takes no further part in its functioning. Just to show you that I'm not misrepresenting the current understanding of this term, let's move to another. The Random House, Webster's Dictionary. A belief in the existence of a God on the evidence of reason and nature only, with rejection of supernatural revelation, distinguished from theism, and a secondary definition: belief in a God who created the world, but has since remained indifferent to it. Here's yet another current English dictionary: rational belief in God, a belief in God based on reason rather than revelation, and involving the view that God has set the universe in motion, but does not interfere with how it runs. Yet another, Cambridge: the belief in a single God who does not act to influence events, and whose existence has no connection with religions, religious buildings, or religious books, etc. I'm amazed in looking at a current definition of deism, because if that is what we mean when we say the founders were deists, then I stand before you and confidently affirm none of the founders were deists.
And this is going to be the theme of the video, is he wants to try to set up a definition and then make blanket assertions that are simply not reported by the vast body of history. And he's going to go pull out obscure quotes, strip them of any political significance of why the person might be making the quote, to then draw conclusions. But there's hundreds of other quotes on the other side The reality is that a deist, a simplistic view of deism today, is somebody who believes in a divine power, but doesn't necessarily ascribe that to the God of the Bible. That does not believe in, as he points out, in supernatural revelation. Well, supernatural revelation is the Bible. That's what it is to us. So what the definition of deism actually is, and that he's admitted to, but apparently not reading into it, is that you believe that there's a God, but you don't believe it's necessarily the God of the Bible because there is no supernatural revelation.
Now, that's a big claim. How can I prove that? Especially going up against all these highfalutin authorities that insist that the founders were deists. Well, rather than giving you my opinion or simply making assertions without evidence, let's go back and see what the founders themselves said. And then you can answer the question whether you want to believe the founders themselves or whether you want to believe political theorists and educators.
So you notice the setup. So he's going to go back and try to find quotes that he thinks supports the notion that they weren't deists, and ignore all of the other quotes that would support that they were deists. And that's the point, is you're dealing with people who lived, 60, 70 years, and whose views probably changed over those decades, just like our views change over those decades of our lives. If you went back and found my quotes from 15 years ago, there's no guarantee they would line up exactly with where I am today. That's silly.
In the last 50 years and what they claim the founders believe. Take, for example, John Quincy Adams, who was the son of the quintessential founder, John Adams.
He wasn't the quintessential founder. He was a founder. Was he important? Of course he was. He was the second president of the United States, first vice president. So, there's no question. By the way, John Adams was, like I said, a believer. If you want to point to somebody who was clearly not deist, it would be John Adams. And then, logically speaking, his son probably ascribed to some of those same beliefs. But, for every John Adams, you can point to somebody who's not like John Adams, somebody who, has, a different opinion and not as zealous.
Who served as first vice president, second president, involved in many other ways. His oldest son, John Quincy, he literally took under his arm and walked him through the founding of our country.
What he's trying to do is he's trying to pretend that John Quincy Adams was a founding father. He wasn't. He was the sixth president of the United States. This reminds me, going back to when Sarah Palin was on the scene, and she made the mistake in an interview of referring to John Quincy Adams as a founding father. Now, clearly she meant John Adams, but she refused to you never accept that you're wrong. So she still says, oh, he was a founding father. No, he was not. Did he? The notion that his father walked him through the founding is a little silly. He was 11 years old at the time. We have a history, first of all, the time period generally accepted for the founding fathers is roughly 1765 to 1789, which encompasses the American Revolution, the Declaration of Independence, and the establishment of the U.S. Constitution. I think we can all agree on that. John Quincy Adams was born in 1767, which would be 22 years before. So he's 22 years old when the founding father age, if you will, is over. Okay, and his timeline basically shows that he was from 1778 to 1779. He was 11 years old, traveled with his father to France. 1780, he studied in the Netherlands. At the age of 14, he, because of his fluency in French, he traveled to St. Petersburg as secretary and translator for Francis Dana. In 83, returned to Paris. You notice he's not founding the country in any of this stuff. He says, direct quote from his memoir, 1785, I've been 7 years traveling in Europe, seeing the world and society. If I return to the United States, I must be subject 1 or 2 years to the rules of college, pass 3 or more tedious studies of law before I can hope to bring myself into professional notice. The prospect is discouraging. If I accompany my father to London, my satisfaction would possibly be greater than by returning to the United States, but I shall loiter away my precious time and not go home until I am forced to. My father has been all his lifetime occupied with the interests of the public. His own fortune has suffered. His children must provide for themselves. I am determined to get my own living and to be dependent upon no one. With a tolerable share of common sense, I hope in America to be independent and free. Rather than live otherwise, I wish to die before my time. Hardly a ringing endorsement of John Quincy Adams being a founding father. 1787, graduates from Harvard. 1789, studies law north of Boston. 1790, now we're out of the founding father era. Earned his master's degree from Harvard. 91, admitted to the bar, started practicing law in Boston. You're getting the sense that he doesn't actually end up in politics until 1800s. So the notion that John Quincy Adams was a founding father is absurd. And it lays the groundwork for the deception that Mr. Miller traffics in. You know what I'm saying? He wants to use Quincy Adams because there's some quotes that he likes from him. And the fact that he's in the lineage of John Adams, who is clearly more on the believer side. So he tries to trump this up to turning somebody who was the sixth president of the United States into a founding father.
John Quincy himself had a distinguished career during the founding era, not only as our sixth president.
No, he did not. The founding era ends in 1789. How far do you think the founding father should be considered? In 1789, he was 22 years old and he was still in school, and he was talking about how basically his father's devotion to public work like impoverished them as a family and forced him to have to contend for himself. He doesn't exactly sound like he's giving an endorsement of it.
But he served in both the U.S. House, the U.S. Senate, served as an ambassador to a number of different countries in behalf of the United States. He was there at the founding. And yet in a speech, a July 4th speech that he was invited to deliver
1821.
Some years after the founding, in fact, 1821, this was to be delivered to the city of Washington. In that, he did a tremendous job of summarizing for us the religious and philosophical complexion of the founders. Here's what he said. From the day of the Declaration, the people of the North American Union and of its constituent states were associated bodies of civilized men and Christians in a state of nature, but not of anarchy. They were bound by the laws of God, which they all, and by the laws of the gospel, which they nearly all acknowledged as the rules of their conduct. So, here is one of the founders, one at the very beginning of our nation, who says, you know, when you look back at the Declaration in the beginning of our country, it is clear that when you look at all of our founders, every one of them believed in God. He was talking about the God of the
I'm
Bible.
Sorry. He was not talking about the God of the Bible. He was talking about a God. That's the entire definition of deism. You know, he's going to make a point later on that like there were no atheists. Atheism really was not a prevailing philosophical position until the 19th and 20th centuries. So the late 19th and then the 20th century. So of course there weren't like, you know, a ton of atheists walking around, you know, who were founding the nation. But this continual lie that he's setting up, first of all, Quincy Adams was not a founding father. He was a kid during the founding of this country. And it sounds like from what he wrote in his own memoir that he wasn't particularly happy with it. So now later on, he gets into politics and he's asked to give a speech, and he prepares a political speech where he is going to appeal to some general religiosity, which a lot of the founding fathers do, which politicians today do that aren't necessarily, you know, believers.
And notice this, nearly all of the founders, that's the vast majority of them.
Yep, he accepts that though. Oh, John Quincy Adams said it, so I'm done. Except that's ridiculous.
Believed in the gospel, that is Christianity. So notice there was not an atheist among the founders. They all believed in God. They all believed in the God of the Bible, and most all of them believed
in Christianity. Well, except he proved none of that. First of all, he never even mentioned atheists, but that's fine. I think prevailing wisdom at the time, I don't think any of the founding fathers were considered atheists. No issue. But the notion that they believed in the God specifically of the Bible is absolutely unsupported by the historical record. Were there some? Yes. But even within those some, even somebody as devout as John Adams, Quincy Adams' father, dismissed the divinity. I'm sorry, the Trinity, rather. So he believed again. You can believe in the God of the Bible and still be completely wrong theologically, and certainly would not be considered Christian by people like Miller today.
In Christianity. So that really settles the question.
No.
If you find an occasional deist among them, then you are going against the mainstream of who the deists were.
Didn't he say in the beginning, like, he wasn't going to make blanket assertions? That's a blanket assertion based upon one quote in one speech from a guy who was 50 years removed from the actual founding fathers.
But you know what? We need to ask another question. Was their definition of deism the same as our definition of deism? Does the word deism as defined in 1776, is that the same definition that we find in modern English dictionaries? As a matter of fact, no, it is not. And to prove it to you, I'm going to put a little tedium on you and urge you to read with me a number of dictionaries from the founding era, both from England and America, that show us the condition of the English language and the definition of deism at that time. Here is one from 1775, Treasury of the English Language. Deism is defined as the doctrine or opinion of those who own the belief of a God, but deny his having ever given or the probability of his ever giving a revelation. Deist is a person who believes the existence of God, but denies all revelation in general. Here is another English dictionary, this one from 1776. A sect among the Christians of most or all denominations who believe there is one God, a providence, the immortality of the soul, virtue and vice, rewards and punishments, but reject revelation and believe no more than what natural light discovers to them, and believe no other article of the Christian religion or any other. Here is one from 1780, again, a dictionary of the English language by Thomas Sheridan. Deism is the opinion of those that only acknowledge one God without the reception of any revealed religion. A deist is a man who follows no particular religion, but only acknowledges the existence of God. Here is 1788, English dictionary. Deism, a denying of the scriptures. Notice how that harmonizes with what we've already seen. They deny revelation. A deist is one who adheres to deism. Here is a dictionary of the English language, this one by John Ash from 1795. He defines deism as the doctrine or opinions of those who acknowledge the being of a God, but reject revelation. A deist is one who acknowledges the being of a God, but rejects divine revelation, one who denies the divine authority of the scriptures. Moving to 1798, Stephen Jones' Dictionary of the English Language. Deism is the opinion of those who, disbelieving all revealed religion, acknowledge only the natural, namely, the existence of one God, his providence, virtue and vice, the immortality of the soul, and rewards and punishments after death. Consequently, a deist is a man who follows no particular religion, but only acknowledges the existence of God. Moving to Johnson's dictionary, moving into the 19th century, 1820, the English language was still defining deism the same way, the opinion of those who acknowledge one God, but deny revealed religion. Therefore, a deist is one who believes in the existence of God, but follows no particular religion. 1822, John Walker's Critical Pronouncing Dictionary. Deism is the belief in one God without the reception of revealed religion, a denial of revelation. Therefore, a deist is a man who follows no particular religion, but only acknowledges God. 1826, another dictionary, this one by two other gentlemen. Deism, the acknowledging of one God, but rejecting the scriptures. A deist, one who follows no particular religion, but only acknowledges the existence of God without any other article of faith. 1854. Now notice, well out of the founding era, the English language is still defining deism the same way. The doctrine or creed.
Notice he said well out of the founding era, from the exact era of John Quincy Adams.
Of a deist, belief in the existence of God, coupled with the disbelief of revealed religion. One who believes in the existence of God, but disbelieves revealed religion. Well, those are standard English dictionaries, not only from the founding period leading up to it, but then continuing for many years thereafter. But let's go to Noah Webster. Noah Webster was a founder, and he produced a dictionary. So his is clearly a very definitive understanding of the concept of deism and deists from the perspective of the founders themselves. Notice in his dictionary.
I don't know if it would be from the perspective of the founders themselves. I think he just created a dictionary, right?
Dictionary. This is, in fact, an 1828 edition, well out of the founding era, but nevertheless.
1828, well out of the founding era, exactly, but when John Quincy Adams was going into politics.
Authored by him, Deism, the doctrine or creed of a deist, the belief or system of religious opinions of those, now notice, who acknowledge the existence of one God, but deny revelation. Or deism is the belief in natural religion only, or those truths in doctrine and practice, which man is to discover by the light of reason,
Like
independent and exclusive of any revelation from God. Hence, deism implies, now notice this, infidelity, or a disbelief in the divine origin of the scriptures. This founder says, if you're a deist, you're an infidel. He then quotes Patrick Henry, another founder. The view which the rising greatness of our country presents to my eyes is greatly tarnished by the general prevalence of deism, which with me is but another name for vice and depravity. Then Webster defines the term deist. One who believes in the existence of a God but denies revealed religion, but follows the light of nature and reason as his only guides in doctrine and practice, a free thinker. Now, moving all the way into the 20th century, the Webster's dictionary by this time is still defining the term essentially the same. Deism is the doctrine or creed of a deist, the belief or system of those who acknowledge the existence of one God but deny revelation. Deism is the belief in natural religion only, or those truths in doctrine and practice which man is to discover by the light of reason, independent of any revelation from God. Hence, deism implies infidelity, or a disbelief in the divine origin of the scriptures. Let's back up just a moment to an earlier edition of Webster, 1817. He makes it very succinct in this compiled listing of terms. Deism is a denial of revelation. Therefore, a deist is an infidel or a disbeliever. In 1833 edition of Webster's dictionary, same thing, a denial of revelation, one who denies a revelation.
I'm sorry for for how many. First of all, it's very professionally done, the video, so it makes it look like it lends more credibility to it. But all he's doing is showing 100 different dictionary entries that essentially say the same thing. And I think he's doing this to overwhelm the viewer, to make them feel like he's making a point, but he's not making any point at all. The notion of deism, there seems to be, a couple of main characteristics throughout the 100 years that he's covering. It's a denial of revelation, which means a denial of scripture. That's absolutely true. And that's absolutely true for a great many of the founding fathers. That doesn't mean that they didn't read the Bible and agree with the way that morality was set, and agree with the notion of, I think they said like punishment and rewards after death. So, what they were doing was what we see today. They were salad bar theologians. They were taking what they liked and leaving what they didn't like. And as we'll see from some even like Thomas Jefferson, who, basically, absolutely believed in a higher power, in God, in a God, but not the God of the Bible. That's the point. He's trying to pretend that all of the founding fathers were like evangelical Christians. That's ridiculous. he's proving the other side of what he's going to claim.
From God. Now, did you notice as we were going through all of those definitions, you never once found in the definitions from the founding era that deism involves a deity that has set himself apart from creation, that has abandoned creation, that has no further interaction with creation. That does not occur one time.
And that has no relevance to anything. So, the fact that the definition of deism may have expanded throughout the centuries would be the same. It would be really not revelatory, because it happens with a lot of words throughout history. So if they added, you could look at something like the NAR. The term NAR originally was probably more focused on C. Peter Wagner's false apostolic authority paradigm, the paradigm of authority over the church, as opposed to necessarily Dominionism, which kind of, came in the next generation of the NAR. So, things change over time. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. The bottom line is the definitions that he provided for deism in the 1700s and the 1800s match exactly who the founding fathers were.
In their definition of deism. So we are forced to conclude the founders defined deism as belief in the one God of the Bible, the Creator.
No. And this is the not so clever sleight of hand that he tries. There's a difference between a God and the God. And the reality is that if they reject direct revelation from God, meaning that the Bible is not direct revelation from God, which he's admitting here, then by definition, they are not believing in the God of the Bible. They're not. And I might add that if they dismiss, like Thomas Jefferson completely dismissed that Jesus was the Son of God. Completely. He rewrote the Bible to remove all the miracles of Christ, which he believed were fiction, and all references to his deity, because he did not believe he was the Son of God. So let me ask you something. If you don't believe that Jesus is the Son of God, do you believe in the God of the Bible? Jesus is the God of the Bible.
But rejecting direct revelation from him in the form of Bible inspiration. Now, that was the definition that prevailed for this concept at the very beginning of our country. So unlike today's deists, the founders all believed, every one of them, believed that the God of the Bible, the one supreme being, was active in the world.
He started again by saying he wasn't going to make blanket assertions without proof. He provides no proof other than some very well choreographed, like snippets from old dictionaries. And then he makes this absurd conclusion. All of the founding fathers did not believe in the God of the Bible. That's ridiculous. And he actually proved it himself. The definition he just showed for deism in the 1700s pretty much says that.
And active in the founding of our republic. Now, that's a very different understanding. Now, were any of the founders deists according to their definition? I believe there were. Well, how many? Scores or most of them, as we have been told? Absolutely not.
What a shock.
In fact, what I have discovered is out of hundreds of individuals that can be styled a founder, I've only found four. Where you can really get in there and find out where they felt, how they felt, and where they stood on this subject.
Before he lists the four, what he's presented as like, out of hundreds, there's only four I found. And then he's going to discount the four. He's going to go into each one individually and try to find random snippets from speeches that they gave to dismiss the fact that they were obviously deists. The first one he's going to do is Thomas Jefferson, which is the easiest to debunk.
Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, by the way, the least religious of the founders. Out of the masses of the founders, the least religious. Thomas Paine, Ethan Allen. Let me take you through these four very quickly. There is no question that these four believed in the God of the Bible. I'm going to prove that to you. They openly acknowledged God's presence and God's providential actions, especially in the founding of our civilization. For example, when Thomas Jefferson was elected to the presidency, our third president, the year was 1801, in his inaugural speech, he indicated that we as a people and he himself acknowledge and adore an overruling providence, which by all its dispensations proves that it delights in the happiness of man here and his greater happiness hereafter. With all these blessings, what more is necessary to make us a happy and a prosperous people? And then he brought his great speech to a close. May that infinite power which rules the destinies of the universe lead our counsels to what is best and give them a favorable issue for your peace and your prosperity.
Okay, so let's focus on the yellow. Acknowledging, adoring, and overruling providence. There is no question that deists believe in an overruling providence. There's no question. They believe in the existence of a God, not the God, a God. They do not ascribe that God, however, to the Bible. That's what does not make them Christian. The second part, and may that infinite power, which infinite power? Jehovah? Because Thomas Jefferson doesn't say that. Thomas Jefferson just, again, asserts an infinite power that rules the destinies of the universe. He believed that. There's no question he believed that. But he did not believe it was Jesus Christ. He believed, even though he liked the teachings of Jesus Christ, he did not accept that he was the Son of God. He did not accept the divinity of Scripture whatsoever. And unfortunately, Dave Miller is misrepresenting this to make his political point.
From that one speech alone, it is clear Thomas Jefferson believed that God was involved in the universe and
Yes, God was. Not the God. Not Jesus Christ. So is that all it takes now for NAR Dominionists? Just somebody from 200 plus years ago randomly referring to God? Because that's the very definition of deism.
Specifically active in assisting presidents and assisting the American governing bodies to function in such a way that peace and prosperity would ensue. And what about his second inaugural, March of 1805? I shall need to the favor of that being in whose hands we are.
That being. What being? What being? I mean, the bottom line is a Muslim could use the term that being to mean their God. Thomas Jefferson is very, very clear about what he did believe and what he did not believe. Nobody is ever making the assertion that Thomas Jefferson did not believe in a ultimate being ruling the universe, if you will. And I'm sure that he used the Bible to base a lot of that belief. But he did not believe in the Bible itself. He did not believe, because if he did, he wouldn't have rewrote it. He rewrote the Bible. He took out all of the miracles from Jesus Christ because he claimed that they were fiction. So that being doesn't, and Miller's going to use this, this is more proof that he clearly believed in the God of the Bible, except it doesn't say that.
Who led our forefathers as Israel of old from their native land and planted them in a country flowing with all the necessaries and comforts of life.
Yes, and he does make the comparison, which a lot of the founding fathers did, of the people of Israel being led out of Egypt, very much to the revolutionaries being led out of England, if you will. I don't necessarily agree with that correlation, but I understand that at the time being, it certainly, would be something that many would ascribe to. And I think that, the other part that Dave Miller ignores here is these are political speeches. The last two quotes are from the first inaugural and the second inaugural address. And he dismisses or never addresses the fact that people oftentimes say things politically for the sake of who it is that they're speaking to, and not necessarily out of their own personal belief system. Like, I wouldn't expect Thomas Jefferson, in an inaugural speech, knowing full well that a good portion of the country at the time was certainly Christian of some ilk or another, to come out and say, as I'm being inaugurated, let me tell you that Jesus Christ was not the Son of God. I don't believe in any of his miracles. Why would he say that? He's making flowery, addresses to try to inspire, America that now that he's been elected president.
Hi, folks, that proves that Thomas Jefferson believed not only in the God of the Bible, the same God that led Israel out of Egypt into the promised land. Thomas Jefferson believed that's the same God that led our forefathers out of England into this land and has provided us with this wonderful environment. Don't tell me that Thomas Jefferson was a deist.
Well, too bad. Thomas Jefferson was a deist, because what again Dave Miller is ignoring is the fact that he does not believe in Jesus Christ. So how exactly is that Christian? The fact that he makes a correlation to the story of Moses leading the Israelites out, and I guess the government of the new America leading the revolutionaries out from the oppressive rule of England, is a logical connection, and quite frankly, more in line with the reason and rationale of deism than of biblical exposition. Because the bottom line is, and this is again established fact that he never wants to address in this rambling, is that Thomas Jefferson did not believe in Jesus Christ. So even if you grant that somehow he believed in the quote unquote God of the Bible, meaning the Old Testament God, he doesn't believe in the Trinity at a bare minimum. He doesn't believe that Jesus Christ is the Son of God. So why in the world would you call him Christian?
According to today's definition, he was not. Nor was he a believer in some generic presence, some providence, rather than the personality of the God of the Bible.
I think his first quote, he actually said providence, didn't he?
This one speech made to the whole nation for posterity as president proves that he believed in the God of the Bible.
Only if you, Dave Miller, do not believe that Jesus Christ is the God of the Bible, because he did not believe in him. Last time I checked, that's what we need to believe in.
Notice further, in a letter that Thomas Jefferson wrote to Dr. Benjamin Rush in April of 1803, in this letter, Thomas Jefferson indicated his view with regard to Christianity. In fact, he said that people were accusing him of opposing the Christian religion or being very anti-Christian. He says, my views are the result of a life of inquiry and reflection, and very different from that anti-Christian system imputed to me by those who know nothing of my opinions.
All right. Because he presents this stuff without context, it's very difficult to comment. I don't know what the criticism against Jefferson was at the time. I'm going to vaguely guess that it was probably because he was outspoken about Christ not being the Son of God, the miracles being fake. And I'm not entirely sure when he rewrote the Bible either, but maybe that had happened before this letter. So it is certainly possible that people are ascribing to him a certain level of anti-Christianism. I don't think that would be an unfair characterization. And he bristles at it, clearly. He's like, these people don't know anything about my opinions. All right, fair enough. That doesn't prove that he was not a deist.
He said, to the corruptions of Christianity, I am indeed opposed. And I am too, aren't you? There are many corruptions of Christianity. But he says, not to the genuine precepts of Jesus himself.
Very important there. Again, the precepts of Jesus, Jefferson did not necessarily have an issue with. Jefferson liked, just like a lot of the founding fathers, liked the general moralistic framework of the gospel and of the Bible. And they did believe it was certainly helpful to rely on such in establishing the new nation. No one's arguing that. But the actual person of Jesus Christ, not the precepts of Jesus Christ, he had a big problem with that. And it's kind of like, again, somebody who he used the word, rational thought and reflection, and that's deism. That's what it is. It's a philosophical view of Scripture as opposed to an inspired divine view of Scripture.
I am a Christian in the only sense in which he wished anyone to be, sincerely attached to his doctrines in preference to all others. Now, he goes ahead to explain in that letter that he gives an indication somewhat that he's not certain that Jesus Christ claimed to be God in the flesh. But the point is, many of Thomas Jefferson's quotes that are given to argue that he didn't believe in Christianity or Christian principles are actually quotations in context that are his railing against the corruptions of Christianity.
Yes, but he believed the corruption of Christianity was the divinity of Jesus Christ. That's the point. And I have to believe somebody as learned as Dave Miller understands that, but he doesn't want to present it. He wants to present this kind of fake view of it because it supports his politics. So the reality is what Jefferson is saying there is like, he rails against what he believes is the corruption of Christianity, of the Scripture. But that corruption begins with the fact that he does not believe Jesus was who he said he was. Jefferson believed that was the corruption.
The perversions of Christianity. He himself said, I believe in the precepts of Jesus Christ.
Who cares? Who cares? Agnostics believe in the precepts of Jesus Christ. That has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
And he acknowledged them to, in fact, be the principles on which the Republic was founded. So out of the hundreds of founders, Thomas Jefferson, not really the deist that we've been told that he was. Well,
yes,
what about Benjamin Franklin? The term deism was actually used by himself to refer to himself, but he defined it differently than we do. Because in the Constitutional Convention, June 28, 1780.
Sorry, before we go there, this is from Monticello.org, which is Jefferson, right? That was where that's named after where he lived. That this is the organization that retains the history of Thomas Jefferson. While Jefferson was a firm theist, the God in which he believed was not traditional Christian divinity. Jefferson rejected the notion of the Trinity and Jesus' divinity. He rejected biblical miracles, the resurrection, the atonement, and original sin, believing God could not fault or condemn all of humanity for the sins of others. He considered that a gross injustice. In neither the 18th century nor today would most people consider a person with these views Christian. So spare me. Back to Benjamin Franklin.
1957 in Philadelphia, when our founders, after the close of the Revolutionary War, were gathered to try to hammer out the Constitution that would govern us as a nation. In that session, he proposed prayer and repeatedly quoted Scripture in that proposal as justification for appealing to the one true God who not only aided them throughout the founding of the nation, but would continue to aid them as they hammered out the constitutions of government. That was proof that he was not a deist by today's definition. And then consider these quotes that came from Dr. Franklin. He said, for example, in response to one who had written him, "You desire to know something of my religion. Here's my creed. I believe in one God, creator of the universe, that he governs it by his providence, that he ought to be worshiped, that the most acceptable service we can render to him is doing good to his other children, that the soul of man is immortal and will be treated with justice in another life, respecting its conduct in this. These I take to be the fundamental principles of all sound religion, and I regard them as you do in whatever sect."
Again, these are the precepts of religion. And it's interesting that Benjamin Franklin is quoted as such, but do note that he says, I take these to be the fundamental principles of all sound religion, not just Christianity. I regard them as you do in whatever sect I meet with them. So again, trying to dismiss deism, he ends up proving it. That's what deism is. Deism is, again, a philosophical belief in the general acknowledgement of a creator, but not that it specifically is the Bible.
I meet with them. Well, I don't necessarily agree with Dr. Franklin about how these principles are to omit other principles like those about Christ, but you can see that.
Did he just gloss over that? Well, I don't agree with Franklin that, basically he dismisses Jesus Christ, but I'm still going to claim he's not a deist because of this.
These principles, these fundamental values that he believed in, do not square with the deistical attachment, the deistical.
That's ridiculously absurd. It absolutely, completely squares with it. That's what he's confusing atheists with deists. An atheist doesn't believe in anything supernatural at all or any higher power. A deist does.
Reputation that has been pinned upon him. What about this quote? He said, "As to Jesus of Nazareth, my opinion of whom you particularly desire, I think the system of morals in his religion as he left them to us, the best the world ever saw or is likely to see."
Now, what he then quickly goes into another quote, "History will afford the frequent opportunities, blah, blah, blah." This quote is not attached to the previous quote. What he did is he stopped the previous quote. But I went and found the entire quote. "As to Jesus of Nazareth, my opinion of whom you particularly desire, I think the system of morals in his religion, as he left them to us, the best the world has ever saw or likely to see." If he had continued with the quote, which I'm pretty sure he had, "but I apprehend it has received various corrupt changes, and I have with most the present dissenters in England some doubt as to his divinity." Now that part of the quote didn't serve Dave Miller's narrative, so he quickly moves into another quote. And that's how you know he's being deceitful.
History will also afford frequent opportunities of showing the necessity of a public religion and the excellency of the Christian religion above all others, ancient or modern.
In the context of a public religion. He's not saying this is what he necessarily believes as a faith doctrine. He's saying that Christian religion above all others would serve as the best public religion, which is entirely sometimes, within the context of what a deist would necessarily say. He's not saying that the scripture is divine or that Jesus is the Son of God. He's just saying that, in terms of public religion, it's probably the best we got.
Let me summarize Ben Franklin and Thomas Jefferson. Here, with your own eyes, you are seeing the holographic notes, handwritten image, actual image of the handwritten notes that both Benjamin Franklin and Thomas Jefferson produced in their efforts to design a great seal for the United States. In essence, they both proposed the same design. And if you were to put that into the form of the seal, here's what it would have looked like. Here is Moses and the Israelites having crossed the Red Sea, Pharaoh in his chariot with his crown and sword uplifted, and his military, Egyptian military, being drowned in the Red Sea, God's presence in the form of a pillar of fire and a cloud above them. And notice the national motto that both Jefferson and Franklin wanted instated for our nation: rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God.
Yep. All right. So, first of all, again, we already talked about the fact that they viewed Moses delivering the Israelites in the same way that they felt that they were delivering the revolutionaries from the oppression of England. The quote was never accepted as the national motto of this country, and actually, Thomas Jefferson, used a version of that for his personal motto: "Rebellion to tyrants is obedience to God." the bottom line is the motto suggests that resisting tyranny is not merely a political act, but a religious one, a way of upholding God's will and justice. The problem with that is it kind of violates Romans 13, doesn't it? We're not supposed to be rebelling to tyrants. We're supposed to be adhering to what the law is that of where we are. And this is an inconvenient truth for many of the NAR Dominionists who insist that Romans 13 is of the utmost importance when their man in their political party is in power. Oh, you gotta, if you say anything against him, then you're violating Romans 13. But they can't go back to the Revolutionary War, because the bottom line is that was not a righteous cause. That was a fiscal cause. We didn't like the fact of the oppression of the king, who was taxing us without representation. That's what the Revolutionary War was about. It was about money. I'm glad that it was, but there's no pretending that we weren't founded on rebellion. And Thomas Jefferson basically saying that he's trying to justify religiously by saying, oh, well, if the guy's a tyrant, then it's okay to rebel. The problem with that, of course, is that you are the one who just determining who a tyrant is. So theoretically, somebody now could determine that Donald Trump is behaving like a tyrant. They can make that assertion. So is it okay and biblical for them to rebel? I guarantee you Dave Miller would say, absolutely not, according to Romans 13.
I'm telling you, these two men were not the deists that we have been told they were. They certainly
He actually proved that they are.
And his interaction in our lives. Well, wait a minute. What about Thomas Paine? Now, come on, Thomas Paine. He's been cited as the ultimate deist of the founders. Well, I have to pretty much agree with that. So out of scores, hundreds, yeah, Thomas Paine could probably be pinpointed as a person who was in fact.
We're an hour in, and I'm going to stop it here because he never gets to the fourth one, to Ethan Allen, because he runs out of time. His main argument for Thomas Paine, or against Thomas Paine, I should say, is that he became kind of anathema to the founders. He became very critical. He became critical of the religious zealotry of the time. He became critical of many of the leaders. And then he even takes some shots at him and says, only 6 people showed up to his funeral, which is true. But he uses that somehow to dismiss him as somehow not being like a founding father. But he was. Now, he was more on the extreme side to anti-religious establishment, as opposed to, say, John Adams, who was on the other side in terms of being more zealous. But it's just a disingenuous argument that he goes ahead and makes about Thomas Paine, who went through a lot of things in his life after he became, he said, oh, well, he wasn't really born here. He was born somewhere else. So somehow he doesn't I guess, measure up in his mind as a founding father. But the reality is he just feels that way because he disagrees with what Thomas Paine basically stood for. But it doesn't really matter, because the overall premise that he's presenting is what's false. The notion that there's only 4 out of hundreds that were deists, and then he dismisses 3 of those 4 and leaves only Thomas Paine, who then he dismisses as not really being a founder because he wasn't really born here and because only 6 people went to his funeral. It's just so transparently deceitful what Dave Miller is doing in this video, and is designed to co-opt your mind into believing that this was an evangelical Shangri-La back in the 1700s, and everybody who founded this country only had Jehovah God and Jesus on their mind, and now the godless leftists have ruined this country, and we need to, turn back America because, somehow they think it was under covenant with God, which it obviously was never. They dismiss slavery out of hand, and maybe I'll get to that video next, as somehow like they were on the righteous side of that story. It completely ignoring, by the way, the 100 years that followed and Jim Crow and the obvious systemic racism in this country, because that doesn't fit the narrative. They dismiss the sweatshops in the early industrial era where kids were working 20 hours a day for no money while robber barons became ridiculously rich. They dismiss our imperial era, where we literally destroyed other countries and stole all their natural resources. They dismiss the various wars that went on after World War II, which were started probably for profit as opposed to necessarily some kind of greater good. Let's say that, like World War II was. It is just intellectually bankrupt to assume that everything in this country was ever that we've ever done is only righteous. It just is. And it takes away from the things that actually were very righteous that this country has done and continues to do. But you don't worship the country. And the bottom line is the founding fathers founded this country in rebellion. Thomas Jefferson admits it. Am I glad they did? Yeah. I mean, I think America is the best secular experiment in the history of government. But that doesn't change these people into Christians. They remain, for the most part, deists. Were there, again, true believers like people like John Adams? Absolutely. But even John Adams denied the Trinity. So how much of a believer is he really? Now, a lot of this is simply cultural. You're dealing with stuff that was 250 years ago, when the world was very different, when faith was very different, when organized religion was very different. And, I think it's a little unfair to criticize the founding fathers as being deists, as equally it is unfair to pretend that they weren't. And more importantly, none of this should have any effect on what we do today or what we believe today. As Christians, we believe in Jesus Christ. They didn't. The vast majority of them did not. They may have liked his precepts. And listen, there's plenty of atheists who will tell you that they like the precepts of Jesus Christ. They like the teachings of Jesus Christ. They just don't believe he was the Son of God. They don't believe the Bible is divinely inspired. That's kind of like what the definition of a deist is. And that's kind of like what the definition of most of the founding fathers were. And there's really no getting around that. No matter how polished a video Dave Miller wants to make, this is beyond revisionist history and biblical and historical twisting. And please just be careful when you get stuff like that. It's all propaganda, but it's propaganda to get you to take your eyes off of Jesus Christ, like the deists had their eyes off Jesus Christ. So, sorry this went a little over an hour, but thanks for stopping by, and test everything and hold fast.